Strebe won't work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, by the way, Chris still don't have any candy in her dish.
Hey now. Okay, do you know where
That's in
I've
the code.
been?
But you keep
I
candy.
am like at baseball games from sun up to sundown,
They sell candy at the
At
baseball
the
game.
concession stand, buy a bucket of
and
gum.
it's expensive.
We'll give you the money. We just want the convenience. You can't argue with me. This ain't gonna work.
He's an experienced arbitrator.
Very experienced.
I can see that.
No, I thought we were gonna go.
Just 5:30.
Ready? Ready? Yeah. Good evening. It is 5:30, so we'll call this special meeting to order. Remind you to turn your cell phones to silent or vibrate. And then let's stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Chris, would you go ahead and take the roll, please?
Councilmember Stevens,
Here.
Councilmember Strebe, Councilmember Berg,
Here.
Councilmember Dalby,
Here.
Councilmember Rowe, Mayor Lazio.
Here. Needed approval, motion for the approval of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Councilmember Berg,
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby,
Yes.
Thank you. This time we invite citizens to make comments on the agenda items. Are there people that want to address anything on the agenda? If you do, would you take a slip out of the basket and fill it out, and we'll call you up at the appropriate time. Let's go to the first item on the agenda.
approve the purchase of 15 tasers with batteries and holsters for a total cost of $19,500 for the Ottumwa Police Department. Recommendation, receive presentation and approve purchase of 15 tasers.
Is there a motion?
Move the recommendation as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Good evening, Chief. You have the floor.
Evening, Council and Mayor. Tasers are used as a tool to gain control or subdue a violent suspect. They have been critical in helping officers to end violent confrontations without having to resort to using deadly force. The current model the department uses has been discontinued and can no longer be repaired. This will replace all discontinued models the department currently has. This is part of the funding through CIP. It's a budgeted item.
Any questions for the chief? Hearing none, take the roll.
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Councilmember Berg,
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby.
Yes.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Larry, would you adjust the air conditioner so we can hear? Okay, item number 2.
Resolution number 140, 2018, award the contract for apron improvements at the Ottumwa Regional Airport to Turner Concrete Construction Incorporated of Ottumwa, Iowa, and the amount of $255,705. Recommendation, pass and adopt resolution number 140, 2018.
Is there a motion?
Move the recommendation as presented.
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, Chris. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This project is to replace an apron area already existing from the original naval base in 1945. It will remove and replace over 32,000 square feet of surface. 2 bids were received ranging from $309,620.70 to $255,705. Bids were checked and reviewed by our consulting engineer, Kirkham and Michael. Turner Concrete Construction Incorporated is the low bidder at $255,705. The Iowa DOT grant will reimburse the city 85% of the final project amount. Remaining 15% will come from the airport fund balance.
Any questions for Chris? Okay, hearing none, take the roll.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Councilmember Berg?
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Resolution number 141, 2018, authorizing the mayor to execute a temporary easement agreement for Ottumwa Regional Legacy Foundation to construct and maintain a trash enclosure on city-owned property and right-of-way. Recommendation: pass and adopt resolution number 141, 2018.
Is there a motion?
Move
Move
the
the-
recommendation as presented.
Second.
Thank you, Holly. Good evening, Larry. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. As part of the continued effort to enhance the downtown business district, Ottumwa Regional Legacy Foundation has agreed to fund and construct an enclosure for dumpsters currently being kept along the northeast side of the Canteen Alley. The enclosure will be partially built on city-owned lots containing the parking ramp and partially on the Canteen Alley right-of-way. Easement is written so that all maintenance and rebuilding costs will be at their sole expense. It terminates if the enclosure is not maintained or if the layout or configuration of adjacent city property or right-of-way changes so that the enclosure obstructs pedestrian, vehicular, or utility access.
Okay. Are there any questions for Larry? You might add a little bit of information. We were just there last, 2 days ago or whatever.
One of the things that we did, we worked with one of the current business owners that have two alleys that are right against his building on the south side of the right-of-way that partially obstructs the traveled portion. He was in agreement after a discussion that we need to move that not only for vehicular traffic, but for appearance. After spending that kind of money to beautify the back alley and to help enhance not only the canteen area, but the back of all the buildings, it just was unsightly, and he agreed, with the continued efforts. There is a kind of an architect's drawing of what it is. It parallels or is similar to what is behind Principal in its structure and appearance.
Okay.
When do you expect this to be done?
They actually, it went to be fabricated last Thursday, I believe. They're going to try to get it installed prior to, I think, the eating contest that I believe Matt and yourself are in. Canteen Alley contest.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, take the roll.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Councilmember Berg?
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
Thank you, Larry. Item 4.
Downtown parking study discussion, recommendation, receive presentation, and receive recommendation and/or direction if applicable.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Move the recommendation as presented.
Second.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think so. You might as well cover your face.
Well, that was easy.
At this time, I'd like to, before we get started, set some ground rules so that we can get as much input and discussion. But sometimes when these topics come up, they become emotional, and I want to be sure that everybody listens carefully so that we give our speakers a chance to hear whatever comments they want to make. If there are some other comment sheets, if somebody on the staff would bring them up when they're collected, that'd be great, so we can hear from everybody. So, Brad, you can introduce yourself and you have the floor.
I think he's getting the presentation loaded up here. Great. Again, thanks, Mayor, Council. I'm Brad Grief, Area 15 Regional Planning Commission, also a board member of Main Street Ottumwa. Last year, this presentation is going to be a quick rehash of what the study purpose was, what we did, how we did it, and then go into the recommendations that we were asked by Main Street to come up with based on what we found and what we heard from surveys. Basically, the study came about because there hasn't been a formal documented study. There's been discussions and task forces before, but there's been no formal document ever presented to the city for review and consideration. And Fred, as nice guy as he is, he fields a lot of complaints from people downtown every day. He's in the community. He's walking around talking with all the business owners. So he's usually the first line of griping that he kind of insulates everybody else down here from. So he took it to, or he was talking to me. I talked to Chris Kukla in our office and Chris Bowers in our office, and they said, well, if they can come up with some match money, we can use some DOT planning funds and fund a study. So that's what we did.
Larry.
All righty. So just kind of going through what the study purpose was. It was first of all to establish an accurate parking inventory for the central business district in downtown Ottumwa. A few of us, Chris, me, Holly, a few others, collected and analyzed on-street and surface parking lot occupancy data for everything downtown, which included public lots, private lots, on-street parking. Holly came up with a set of surveys that she sent to the business owners, property owners, downtown residents, downtown employees, and any customers that happen to come downtown and find the sheet could take. And she had over 300 responses on that. So pretty good cross section of folks. And then what Fred wanted us to do was come up with an initial set of recommendations that the city of Ottumwa and its partners, which is Main Street Ottumwa, OEDC, Legacy, et cetera, could do at relatively low cost or no added cost, such as you'll find out later, you have paint in your budget, but some of the striping we feel isn't the way it should be. So it's just changing the design of the paint rather than adding to the budget. So things like that can help improve the parking situation, the pedestrian experience, and basically make a safer, more attractive downtown. Our study provides quantitative and qualitative information. It's got opinions mixed with facts rather than just a kind of opinion-based study. And then what at the time we thought this was going to serve as a basis for discussions among individuals in a parking task force. Again, I talked to Mayor, a few of the council members. I'll let them create the recommendation there as to if they're going to pursue an actual task force, if they're going to just say, hey, Main Street, can one of your committees take this on? I'll let you guys kind of figure that stuff out. Again, parking downtown in general isn't terribly full. It is kind of spatially distributed. It gets there's hot spots in downtown that do have a lot more issues than others. And some of our recommendations tonight come from the data here of the the hotspot areas that need some work. I don't need to really read through all this stuff since we did it 3 months ago, but the peak occupancy, excluding the municipal parking lot or Market Street parking lot, whatever you want to call it, for all hours, all observations over the 3-month period that we took them, was less than 60% occupied, which means in general there's not a dearth of parking downtown. There we go. All right, so there's your average on-street parking during the noon and 4 o'clock hours when businesses are open, mostly. So as you can see, there's a few yellow spots on there, mostly the light yellow-green, which is less than 50% full. The yellow's between 50 and 74% full. There's no areas that average over that 75% threshold. But you go to the peak, and you can see the Hotel Ottumwa has some issues there. The 100 block of East 4th has issues when school is in session, more specifically when it's getting out of session and kids are getting picked up for the day. Right there in front of Tequila Grill is another really busy spot. And then there's a few spots there, between Court and Green Street on 2nd and East Main. Average parking lot occupancy, again, mostly green, which means there's usually over 50% of the spots are available. Again, you can see that there's a couple hot spots there behind Bailey's at the hotel, again at the Catholic school up there, and then the River Hills area. So going back to the survey results, what we found based on the responses from the people that talked to us and responded to the survey was that the current on-street regulations generally fit the needs of consumers, which is generally there's enough parking and generally there's within a certain walkable distance, and it's for the amount of time that they need it. Like 2 hours is generally what it is downtown. There's a couple spots that we feel should be moved to 2 hours parking. Again, in front of Tequila Grill is 1 hour parking. I know that the Mexican restaurant's pretty quick, but it's a pretty big rush to get in and out of eating your dinner in an hour. The public parking lots, based on the results of the survey, generally are not used for customers downtown. However, if they were to be used by customers, they said that they would find the distances from their locations to where they're going would be acceptable. The lots are also generally underutilized by employees and residents. This was prior to the enhanced enforcement, the officer coming down there. I work on East 2nd, right up next to TLC. It's still not great. Employees still park right out front and do the 10 o'clock shuffle. One car moves around the block and the others just move a spot forward. So there's always going to be some issues there. But another complaint that we heard was a lot of employees and business owners themselves were parking right in front of their business, occupying a spot. Aside from changing their methods and their attitudes, there's not a whole lot we can do there other than making sure that we're enforcing it. Again, enforcement and public safety were major areas of concern. Again, enforcement's picked up in the last 3 months. Concerns for parking lot and sidewalk and drive lane pavement conditions were emphasized. Again, the city's started the process of doing streetscape or at least moving towards streetscape improvements. So, the city's being responsive to that desire. Concerns for parking lot vandalism, loitering, poor lighting. Again, this was all before the enforcement was there. And another thing that I've heard from quite a few business owners and people shopping downtown is the lack of or the inconsistent signage for the parking lots. If you're not from here, how do you know where to go park? If you're a new resident down here, how do you know where you're supposed to park and can park your vehicle overnight? Those are concerns that they have. So this comes down to our recommendations. Again, these are just the first few that we have that we think could be done at low or no cost to the city. That we wanted something, well, I guess what some folks around would call easy wins, things that the city could do to show that they're moving or that they're progressing toward responding to the needs and desires of the people that live and work and do business down here. So there's two things that two types of changes we're recommending today. There's policy changes and then physical changes. The policy changes are basically information-based and making sure that there's consistency among the ordinances and permits and how they're enforced. The physical changes are signage and wayfinding improvements, which is what I would consider more expensive of the two. And then striping and geometric design improvements, which again, the only thing that we're talking about tonight is paint, which again, should be in the budget. So when we go to parking information, if you're a new resident or you're someone that's visiting here for maybe the first time, how do you know where you can park? Are there permits required? If so, what types of permits are there? Are there different types of permits for the different colors of paint on the ground? Are those permits in code anywhere, or are they just kind of something that somebody decided to do at some point and we're not enforcing laws that may or may not be in actual ordinances? And again, who's in charge of issuing the permits? I looked on the city's website today for parking information, and this is all the parking information there is. 3 telephone numbers, no names, no positions, I don't know who to talk to. Simple change. The city's redoing its website right now. No extra cost, really. I mean, maybe $100 to add a website or a web page. I would assume that I think I talked to Holly at the earlier stages of redesigning the website that this should be something that is included. Most major cities around the state of Iowa have something similar to what Cedar Falls has. Really easy, simple website. Talks about parking, tells when it's enforced, has 2 clickable maps that open up a new window. Talks about where you can buy your permits, what types of permits there are, and who's in charge of the parking policies. And there's an example of the map that they've got. I don't really like it, but it's better than nothing. Again, for this parking study, we created maps. We have all the shape files. We have everything that we need to make a really easy map that we can give to the city at no cost. So that's something that is free and easy and would allow people that are either new to downtown or planning on visiting downtown to know what they can and can't do. And I took a deep dive into the Code of Ordinances and highlighted everything that dealt with parking downtown. And you guys have a copy of that if you want to help sleeping at night. That's a good thing to read. But our review of the code and the ordinances found that there are inconsistencies and inaccuracies in the practice of enforcing parking. Couple instances here. What do you call that lot next to the dam? Is it the hydro lot? Is it the Market Street lot? Is it the municipal lot? Depends on who you talk to. What are the rules there? Well, the city's map that they have that they kind of track parking spots on says it's the Muni lot and that it's a 24-hour no permit free parking lot. However, you get into the city code and it says that it is the Market Street lot and that it is 3-hour parking all day. So we're not enforcing it the way that the code says. Simple change, just rewrite the code if you want it free 24-hour parking all day. But if somebody were to get a ticket somehow or whatever, they'd have a legal recourse and whatever. So the Jefferson Street lot is being enforced currently the same way that all the other lots around town, 3-hour free parking. You need a permit otherwise, but the code says it is a 2-hour parking lot at all times. No time limitation, but at all times. Again, simple code rewrite. But it's just another thing that we just need to make sure that we're all consistent in our language and our enforcement. And the hours of enforcement, by the way, some parking is 8 to 5, some is 7 to 6, some is 7 to 7. Just make it consistent. It makes his job easier. And again, especially concerning for visitors and residents, I get to hear this from people. I think you guys have received, or somebody received an email from a disgruntled new resident downtown that he didn't know that what lots he could park in or how he could park for free downtown and whatnot. So the theme of all these ordinances and permits is consistency. So the permit information currently is distributed by both City Hall and the Chamber. And depending on who at the Chamber or who at City Hall is giving out or assigning the permit, you may have a different price for the permit. You might have different information on where you can and can't park. If they hand any information out at all. And a lot of downtown residents haven't been, again, made aware that if you're a downtown resident, you can park for free in any of the municipal lots downtown. You just have to go in, show your lease, and get a permit. I know this because Kay told me this. Some other folks, the landlords don't know that because they only have 1 or 2 properties downtown and only rent to 1 or 2 people at a time, and just don't know that this policy is in effect. With the new clerk and some of the older clerk people or city staff in the clerk's office didn't know that there were residential permits. I can't blame her for not knowing the policies because I've asked several people at the city, you know, what the policy is, who's in charge of parking, and nobody seems to be able to give me the right answer. I read the code and it says the city administrator and the city clerk's office are the ones that are supposed to be in charge of parking and permitting and all the regulating of parking. So because I read the code, I know, but there's nowhere that anybody that's calling into the city and asking that question or going onto the website would be able to find out that information. You guys have a packet of the permits too that I was provided from Amanda before she, as we were starting this study. I asked her for every ordinance and every permit related to parking. So if there is a red permit ordinance, I've never seen it. I can't find it in the code anywhere. I've never seen an ordinance for it. There's red spots in every lot, in every public lot downtown, Washington, Jefferson, or not Jefferson, Green Street, commercial. I think they're paying higher prices to get those permits, but I've never seen an official rule or law in the book that says that those spots are to be treated any different. And if you look at the signs that are up there, it says permit parking only. It doesn't say red permit parking only. It just says permit parking only. So anybody that buys a blue permit, in theory, can park in that space and feel like he's in the right spot. Again, we just need to find a way to make sure that our laws and ordinances are consistent with the way that we're enforcing them. So for the short term, our recommendation is that permits only be sold at one location so that everybody's getting the same information and paying the same price for them. I know that the ordinance says that bulk permits are cheaper, you know, the more you buy, but it doesn't seem really equitable or fair that somebody just walking into town off the street that got a new job downtown that doesn't know the chamber sells those permits for $6 would walk into the city and pay $22 for the same permit. That seems kind of swindling and just disingenuous. Permits also, there's a daily parking permit ordinance that was established in 1988. We would recommend that continue. It's $1 a day. So people that go to the hotel for an event can go pay they can pay $1 to park at the Washington Street lot all day. That's a great idea, I think. Where was it? Obviously, we're not going to recommend any change to the parking ramp permit, because that's obviously something that costs a lot more money to build and maintain, as you guys just spent. We would think that the residential parking permit is a great thing to keep. Again, we think that should be on the website, and landlords should know about that, so that, you know, we kind of incentivize the people that are paying a little extra to live down here anyway, can have a place that they know that they can park and don't have to pay extra for it, unless they want to park in the ramp and pay extra for it. And then we would also recommend that instead of going for monthly passes, for people like, you know, Main Street Ottumwa doesn't, well, some of your employees do. But like Area 15, we got 5 people. We're here, you know, 365 days a year, but we have to get 12 different permits each. So we're issuing 30 permits per person or so a year. It's like, or for the group, it just doesn't make sense not to have an annual permit that would reduce staff time and administration. And then also, we don't really like the giant hang tags in the windows that catch the wind if you're driving across Market Street Bridge and they blow out. So what do I do if that happens? Which it's happened several times in my 4 years here. We would think that, you know, you have those nice permits for the parking ramp. If you have an annual permit, make a nice small window hang tag that looks just like that, but is a different color for the other lots, and you know, it isn't a visibility issue either. For the long term, really in the city of Ottumwa, I'm not really sure that we need parking permits at this time, especially since the idea for parking permits and enforcement is to pay for maintaining lots and enforcement. You know, if that money is just going into the general fund and isn't going toward any parking improvements or enforcement improvements, people really question what's the motivation for even having parking permits. We would say that, you know, let's keep the red ones. Let's make all the blue ones, or get rid of the blue ones. That way there's premium spots that people like, you know, my office might want to have, you know, a better spot in the Green Street lot that's closer to us that we know that we're going to have, and make the people at, you know, TLC or whatever walk a little farther. You know, some of the folks over at, you know, the eye clinic or whatever, they get the red permits right now. And, you know, they have that back row assigned to them, so they know that they have a parking spot in their lot all day, every day, that's available for them. So they're never fighting for parking. You know, that makes sense to us. And then we would also recommend that someone conduct a thorough review of the ordinances. I mean, I looked at everything and kind of made a few notes, but I know that it costs money to have, you know, Joni look through ordinances and do, you know, in staff time. It would take them, you know, considerable amount of money or an expense that the city would have to do to go through all that. Somebody could be, you know, a volunteer group that's in charge of, you know, the whole idea of Main Street Ottumwa is to improve the, you know, the conditions and situation downtown. We would be happy to do this for no cost to the city. We'd come up with a list of, you know, things that are maybe out of date or things that are missing that we could help, you know, just basically write for you. For instance, there's a reference to the Rock Island Railroad tracks that haven't been there since the 90s. I mean, things like that that we just need to update. Now to the physical improvements. There's one parking sign in downtown Ottumwa that directs you from a street to where parking is. Most downtowns have a couple dozen of these that point to where you're supposed to go, help direct traffic toward the end goal. We would recommend that some of those be installed in some of the major entryways around town. The other signage improvement that we would recommend is that we remove all the signs from the public lots where they do exist, and install signs where they do not exist, that have uniform design, uniform shape. They say the parking lot name on them so that you know which parking lot you're in. Then have the rules of the parking lot. Like, this is a free 3-hour parking lot between 8 and 6 or 8 and 5 or whatever the agreed amount of time is, so that drivers know and visitors know and residents know where they can park and follow the law. Right now, as you can see, there's a smorgasbord of signs out there. Most of them, there's a few new ones out there that, I mean, they look good, but they just don't have enough information on them. And again, there's no consistency across what they are. So when you're new to downtown or you're trying to do business down here, you want good signage that tells people where they can park. I think if we had better signage like this, then a lot of your complaints from business owners would vanish, because right now, especially the Jefferson Street lot, nobody knows there's a parking lot back there unless you live here. It looks like there's a substation and a small little tight alley. If you're not from here and don't have Google Maps to see, you know, that, oh, that's a back entrance to My Chic or to Appanoose Rapids, you're not going to know to go back there. Again, simple things that we can do at, again, there's a cost to it, but it's a low cost alternative. We've kind of discussed a little bit of the striping. There are, unless you pay attention to, you know, the street pavement markings, you probably wouldn't even know these little X locations exist throughout downtown where former business entrances used to be in buildings that no longer exist and haven't existed for, you know, upwards of 20 years. Some of the things that we're talking about are just eliminating those X's, and in spots like this on Green Street, get rid of those 2 X's. You can add a parking spot. It's free parking. Or down here at the parking ramp in front of the hotel, I'm sure that used to be an entrance to the building that preceded the parking ramp, but it's been gone for, you know, they built the ramp in early 2000s, and it's just been striped over the same since, you know, the days previous to that. You'll see that this is an exit to an alley. It just makes sense to put a sight line now that there's 2-way traffic. Back before there was 2-way traffic, it wouldn't have mattered because you're not going to expect a car coming from that direction. But now that you do, move that X to where the little car is there, shift all the parking spots back. And again, for the cost of paint, you've increased safety and just made a better little environment. Maybe. All right. Up here on Washington, this is a kind of a no-brainer for me. There's a handicap spot out in the middle of nowhere near absolutely nothing. Why not just swap a white spot for a blue spot there that's in front of the physical therapy office? Paint the one blue, paint the other one white, and simple little easy thing to do. You know, I mean, maybe somebody from physical therapy wants a little exercise to get back to their car, but back in the day, which was again early 2000s, really the only change that's happened in traffic downtown is the one-way to two-way conversion. The downtown drive lanes and turn lanes haven't changed much at all since the bypasses were built. All the highways used to come downtown. Now they don't, so all that traffic went away. Now we only have really localized traffic that's down here that should be slow moving, that doesn't need to rapidly, expediently get through downtown. And again, that's what you want. You want people to drive slower so that they see your businesses and like, oh, maybe I'll stop there. So now that the traffic volumes are lower than the past, your turn lanes really don't need to be in downtown. So our thought, if you take a look at an aerial map, you'll notice that Market Street is a worm currently, or a piece of spaghetti that you could really just pull tight and you can make a nice straight top to bottom drive lane. And there's kind of three or four different sections to this. I know some of this is proposed for change already in the streetscape idea or concept, but in the meantime, there are some things that we could do. Again, if we're painting lines, it just kind of makes sense to do some of this stuff, some of this easy stuff right now while we can, to make it just a better driving situation. I wanted to put together a nice little measurement thing that had all the dimensions and whatever on here to show how doing some of this straightening actually improves the, maintaining a single lane width all the way down. I've got all the measurements in the back here, but I just ran out of time to put them all together. But by doing all this stuff, we're proposing here, we're making lane widths the same all the way up and down the street. We're straightening out the street, and we're adding a bunch of parking spots where, there's going to be a little backlash at, when the streetscape comes along, that we're proposing to turn the angle parking on the 200 block of East Main to parallel parking. So if we just do a couple little things on the edges, right here, right there, and then in front of River Hills, we're adding all that parking that we would take away by just adding paint. So a net gain or net loss of 0 spots by doing that whole streetscape program. So when people, come up to you during the streetscape and say, well, I'm losing parking in front of my business, well, you're gaining it 500 feet away. I had the idea of converting the turn lane right there for the northbound off of going toward Main Street on Market to a loading zone, because you'll notice that if you drive downtown at all, you'll notice that Bridge City uses that almost hourly for loading of some sort. And to me, it just makes sense to turn that into a loading zone so that if, say, UPS needs to deliver to somewhere on the 100 or 200 block, they've got a parking spot right there that they know that they can go to, and they don't have to park in the middle of the street like they do now and create a giant traffic hazard at lunchtime. Again, River Hills has been under construction for, it seems like, forever. And they've had machinery blocking that turn lane for the last 6 or 8 months. Obviously, you don't need that. So let's get rid of it when those guys go away and add 3 parking spots there. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, I had up toward, I already talked about the 2-hour parking in front of Tequila Grill. And here we are at what I would consider the most dangerous intersection in downtown, 3rd Street coming out of the Courier lot, or the 3rd Street lot, whatever you want to call it. And they have a turn lane going down, they have a drive lane going down, they have a turn lane going up, and a drive lane going up. Right now, that's one of the bigger places that has a parking shortage. That again could be remedied by getting rid of the two turn lanes, converting the 2 lanes on the left that currently go south, and putting parking on that side. That drive lane going south is 7 foot 6 inch drive lane. Doing what I'm recommending here, you're moving both drive lanes to 12 feet wide, which is a standard width. You'd have a 19 or so foot area to park there. And what I would recommend is when you put that parking out there, you'd move the stop sign from behind. Right now, the stop sign is right at the edge of the picture. You'd move the stop sign basically out. You'd put like a yield to pedestrian sign right there at the crosswalk. Put the stop sign out at the intersection. Why would you do that? Because right now at the current stop location, you can't see that car coming at me right up there. You can barely see the top of a car coming right there. If you move the stop to where I recommended it, this is your view. Again, your public safety committee would probably want to take a look at that, and I think that they would agree with me that that is an intelligent choice to do. That help your semis coming in and out of 3rd Street for paper deliveries and whatnot. And again, that would reduce your vehicular almost crashes that I've seen. You were there yesterday standing at the intersection and you watched 2 cars almost hit each other because he had to creep all the way out into the drive lane before he saw that car coming. So. And then the other complaint that we've had from folks, and this is a somewhat easy, a little more difficult decision than the other one, is the river drive between Main and Market. With the current striping pattern and the remnants of the previous drive lanes, it's excessively confusing to people. I was out here doing my measurements the other day, and somebody came off of Court Street and drove straight up this way. Why? I don't know, but probably because he didn't realize that this was the actual drive lane. What we would propose, and what we've heard from several people that work at both Peoples and River Hills, is that if we turn these former 2 drive lanes up here into 1 drive lane each direction, flip your parking around and put it up against the railroad tracks, you've got a solid bank of parking all the way from the railroad clubhouse to Market Street. And what would that do? That would, again, it'd make driving more intuitive, reducing the confusion for people. You wouldn't have this awkward turn area here that I've seen people almost get killed at, and you wouldn't have this confusion area here. And then you'd have all this parking all the way up along here. I haven't done the math, but you would probably have enough to get every person that works at River Hills and parks in the Market Street lot across the railroad tracks, so they never have to cross the railroad tracks to go to work. Which you get that complaint all the time, I'm sure. Well, the damn train blocks me and I have to stand there and wait for that in the rain. Well, you wouldn't have that now. So those are, I think, everything that we had in the initial round of discussions. Yeah. So,
Okay, thank you very much, Brad. That's a very thorough report, and I think your last comment about referring this to our ops committee and having our city staff work with our ops committee, because that's what we would normally do for any traffic change or pattern, makes really good sense. Before we go any further, are there any other individuals that want to address the council? People that are either downtown or have had issues or can shed some light on things? Come on up to the microphone, introduce yourself, and we'll give you a little more leeway tonight since it's a work session, special meeting. If you get too long-winded, we'll let you know that.
Hi, thank you. My name's Sherry Locke, and my business partner and I own 5 properties downtown, and we're in the process of on 5 apartments downtown. And I just wanted to respectfully request your consideration in as a as a permit holder, a monthly permit purchaser, we purchase 8 permits a month for our people. We represent Top Hat Coffee and Entertainment and Blessings Soup Kitchen. And Blessings uses 50 to 70 volunteers a week, and they're picking up a lot of tickets. And we would request a 4-hour limit in the parking lot. And due to the age of our people, and the other thing that I thought would be nice is if we could ask business owners to take the back row in the parking, and perhaps River Hills take across the tracks and not use the parking and fill up the front row where our clients need to be. And one thing Brad talked about the size of the permits, they do blow off the thing. And I've got, I think, 5 tickets just from my window, them blowing off. So we do buy our permits, and we are picking up quite a few tickets anyway. And then in future, for future consideration, 500 feet for a coffee purchase is a lot. And I just want to put in our request that they please consider diagonal parking staying, because parallel parking isn't that easy for a sector of people that want to just come in and have a quick coffee. We're doing really, really well right now with our businesses, and we just would like to remain on a positive flow. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry. I think, Linnell, I saw your hand go up.
Thank you very much. My name's Linnell Deers. I'm the Director of Wapello County Public Health, and we're right down near River Hills Community Health Center. First of all, I want to say this was a great study. Good results. You were very, very thorough, and I was just amazed. It was really good. I think he has some very good low fruit wins that can be done that aren't going to cost the city a bunch of money. My concern is with the parking around the Wapello building and River Hills Community Health Center. I am so glad that he did recommend that you change how the parking is out on the street on River Drive, because let me tell you, it is dangerous when you're backing out and some cars are coming along. Thank goodness I do have a vehicle that has that camera and I am able to see, but I know I've heard a lot of people say they've had near misses because it is really difficult to see cars coming when you're backing out, when you're in that center parking. My other issue is public health. We have staff that come and go constantly. They're getting tickets when they're parking. In the parking lot behind the Wapello building and River Hills Community Health Center, it is an hour and a half. That is not enough time sometimes. I know my staff do try to park wherever it's available, but when we're coming and going, it is difficult. We can't wait for the train. You know, when we need to go, we need to go. And I know when River Hills was being built, Mayor Lazio and I believe it was the engineer got us together, the ones of us that worked in the Wapello building, and Rick Johnson, and discussed what was going to go on during the construction and then post-construction with the parking lot. Originally, the plans were the spaces would change in that Wapello parking lot. And I'm not sure that's the correct terminology for that parking lot, but the line stayed the same after the construction. They were supposed to be turned the other way, so you would be facing, it would be west versus leaving them alone. And that the premise was they would get more spaces for parking that way. And then there was a query about how many parking spaces each entity needed down there. And so we did submit, you know, how many parking spaces that we needed just for the few staff that are coming and going constantly. And that did not happen either. And since mental health has left the area down there, you don't have those patients coming and going. There's many times when I'm walking to my vehicle and that back lot is half empty with parking tickets on them. And I guess, you know, I feel we need to make good use of what is available. So if there would be any consideration for the ones that are coming and going, if there could be certain spots made available just for those individuals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linnell. Anyone else that wants to address the council? Okay, at this time, then I'd like to suggest the council either discuss or give us some direction as what you would like to see happen, and where do we go from here? This is an issue that seems to be, it just keeps growing and has legs. We need to get something on the books and live with it, and maybe to make whatever changes are appropriate. And I think, again, I would stress to the council, we ought to probably take this and take the study that was done by regional planning and give it to the members of the ops committee and involve public works, police department, the street crew too, because I think sometimes we forget things like snow removal and getting plows around certain things. So what's your pleasure, council? What would you like to see happen from here on out? Holly?
Oh, I think, go ahead, Matt.
Matt?
I
You
can go
looked ready.
anytime.
Okay.
You looked ready to go.
Nobody listens anyway to me. So. No, first of all, I want to thank Brad, Main Street, Area 15, and Holly for putting this parking study together. And the last time you presented this, I said, I don't want to see this parking study just get thrown in a drawer and disregarded. And I think the city's tried to do a good job of keeping up with some of the changes downtown. But, you know, with everyday life and the amount of workload they have, it's hard to get to the details like you did. So I thank you for that. And like the mayor said, a lot of these traffic changes would have to, you know, obviously, and we've talked about it, Brad, go through the public safety advisory and involve the staff and police on those. And I hope that moves forward, because I think you gave some pretty obvious and simple things there that, pending the safety and the standards that apply to our streets and traffic flows, can happen. I was a little offended when you said that our city code is out of date. I've never heard that before. But now that you mention that, you know, back in 1988, we didn't have as many downtown residents as we do now. People didn't live downtown. This is something new. We have more restaurants. We have Top Hat Coffee. We've got, you know, a couple breweries downtown. People don't just pop in, you know, and shop for a half an hour at a retail store. They go in to eat lunch, sometimes dinner, coffee, and sometimes it takes longer than an hour. You brought that up, and that's changed since 1988. And like I said, we've tried to change a few things in our code and add some amendments, and I think we've done a pretty good job. I won't put anybody on the city side down, but I think what we need to do is take this study that you've done, look at it real close. I'm on board with a lot of the smaller striping changes. You know, most of those make sense. The permitting, I would like to see us maintain our you know, permit buy-in bulk permit system. However, if we can reduce and simplify that process with colored permits, I'm all on board with that. Getting the business owners' input tonight has been important, because, you know, we've wanted to hear that, and we want to hear that at every time we have a parking issue downtown. And I think this is a good first step moving forward. And again, I would, you know, move it to staff and you and whatever. If I'm totally on board with a task force. I mean, if that's what it needs to have, if Main Street would do that, or whatever the council would decide, or, you know, staff would recommend. It never hurts to come back to the council every, you know, year or so and say, hey, things in our downtown are changing a little bit. That's obvious from 1988. And so I think that's a good idea too. I would say I'm on board with moving forward on some of these things, on a lot of these things with a task force. You know, I'm flexible, but I thank you very much for putting this forward, and I hope we take it, you know, seriously and get some things done for the betterment of our downtown. So thank you.
Holly?
So not to reiterate everything Matt said, I'll move forward without saying thanks and all those things. But one of the things I guess I was going to ask Administrator Morris is if, you know, one of the first things that was recommended was the information on the website. Is that something we can move forward without, you know, needing a vote from council, if that's something
That's correct, Councilwoman. That's an item we can move on administratively. In fact, I had a conversation with Brian McMillan today. I know you visited with him as well. So as soon as that requisite information is available, that's not difficult at all to add that to the website. Probably as an attachment page.
And I guess then from staff's perspective, or then what do we need to do for next step? And we don't have to solve it all tonight, but I think in the short term, we need to look at, are we going to look at Main Street to review some of those ordinances? Or is that something, or, maybe that's a you question, Joni, on some of those things where I know I hear a lot of people, and I've gotten a few emails and phone calls about where they called and looked up this ordinance, but they were told this on the phone. And I know we're seeing some discrepancies there. So I think we want to make sure that we can move forward on that.
Well, that's a good question. I was scribbling some notes myself. First of all, to reiterate what Councilman Dalby said, and I want council to certainly back clean up on this in terms of the process going forward on effectuating some of these changes and improvements. And one would be, I'm assuming then, to pick up on what Councilman Dalby said, council is going to identify or augment some of those items that are listed in the report. In addition to that, I like the suggestion that Mr. Grief gave in terms of going through and, let's just say, summarizing some of those recommendations. I think if we have those in front of us, we can go forward. Certainly, the Traffic Safety Committee needs to play I believe that's a requisite committee, am I correct, Mayor, in terms of additional vetting. But I think it's fair to say that it's not going to happen overnight insofar as that if we have these, we're asking, I would think you'd have council, traffic safety, area 15, staff. So you've got 4 entities essentially that would be vetting these. And that seems to me the proper process. I would start, I don't know that you have to start with one in particular, but certainly I would want to find out what the elected folks say. I would want to start with council. But you could go to these other entities, and it seems to me they could be working in tandem at the same time, because that way you don't have them, quite frankly, you have council give the recommendations, and then traffic safety as an example say, well, before we make our recommendations, let's read what council said. And council may want to, and area 15 may say, I want to see what the other 2 said. So it seemed to me the best thing to do would be to have those 3 entities working all at the same time. In addition to that, you would want to get recommendations from staff and what's within the realm of not only what's possible, but also money. It's not going to require a great deal of money, but certainly there have to be some money expended, particularly on the signage. So my recommendation would be to start with those council of traffic safety in area 15. I like that idea of the summary moving in tandem. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you, see if you may want to call on staff.
The other thing that we did not talk about, when you talk about permit parking, I've had a number of visitors who come to town to do city business, and right out in front of City Hall, it says 30 minutes. And so I think we need to still continue to think through either the day permit or an administrative permit that either the clerk or you, Andy, could assign, so that whether it's a visiting engineer from Des Moines or whether it's a member of our cemetery board or whatever group is here in room 108, they're not getting ticketed when they're doing city business, because I think sometimes that's unfair to ask them to do city volunteer work, and then we end up giving them a ticket. And I talked to the chief about this, and our department's been very gracious and worked with us very well on some of those individual cases, but we need to have a policy and a procedure we can follow, so it doesn't make any difference who's in office or who's on the council. It's handled the same way. So I agree with you. I think we need to get the entities together and digest this material and come back with a clear recommendation. And what's a reasonable timeline, Andy, in terms of, are you thinking?
Well, first of all, Mayor, I want to augment what you mentioned, and that's the difficulty then of folks that are at City Hall, and they may be here for work or work product, and they get tickets. We have not fixed any of those tickets or taken care of them or anything such as that, but it certainly does exist as a problem. As it relates to the 3 entities that I've identified here, it's difficult for me to, I can certainly say what staff's going to do, but I'd be careful what I instruct council to do, but certainly council, the Traffic Safety Committee, and these others could get started. I don't have a definitive timeline other than it would seem to me it would make sense if we could begin this at a minimum in the June timeframe. Could get started. If council members have questions, comments about that, I certainly will be open to those discussions. And then you're right, we need to come back with some recommendations. One other item I will mention, though, and this is just from my perspective, anyway, having been here and having come back, I think one fairly easy problem to knock off would be to just sell these permits at City Hall instead of at the Chamber of Commerce. There's a markup, and the markup really isn't that much, but I think if Chris were here a little bit longer, you can testify to the fact that confusion is a nice word. When people come in and that you can buy them at both locations. I would rather have one central one so they get one story. But again, Mayor, going back to yours, again, my thought would be starting in the June timeframe with those entities, and staff can certainly start working on some of those recommendations.
Would the council be reasonable or consider this reasonable? And I'm just pulling this out of the air, but if we said that we start in June and over the summer months, would it be reasonable to come back in the fall, like September, and say, where are we at? And is that too soon? Is that enough time? There's a lot of work already been done, so I think we can build on that.
Go ahead, Skip. You haven't talked yet.
Well, number one that I think of, Public Works Director Larry Seal's crew is going to have to lay out off the downtown. They probably went about as far as they can go in parking. I'm not sure of that, but they'll have to move elsewhere. Go ahead, I'll let you talk.
We've actually instructed crews to stay out of that area until we determined what we were going to do. We didn't want to paint it and then have to come in and remove it. The painting itself is probably correct to say it uses roughly the same amount, didn't matter where you actually put the parking spots. The difficulty with the crew, keep in mind, I've got 3 people in the paint department, one off with an extended medical issue. And we have one seasonal that lasted till next week, and then he's gone. So we have 2 people to do a lot of this work until we get one of our seasonals replaced. But there's several other bigger issues that we need to address before we start painting. River Drive is the one. We had stayed out of that for several years until we got a determination from council, and there was multiple groups involved trying to determine, are we going to move the transfer station onto River Drive? I went back and looked. We've got drawings back a couple different years now to where, are we going to do streetscape with some of the concepts that was developed with Legacy and their groups? Are we going to put the transfer station on the corner of Court and River? That changes the layout of that street drastically. And again, painting is not near as hard as removing the old paint. That's where you get into the confusion. You know, that was mentioned during the presentation that you've got some of the old dividing lines, lane dividing lines that's there. That's because it's hard to remove. There are different companies that have different types of pressure washers, rotary pressure washers, sandblasting, things that do take that off. But it's not as easy as just taking an eraser out to the concrete. I haven't found a paint eraser that works real well on the streets yet. So if we could get some guidance on that, I know we just initiated and started talking about if we're going to move that transfer station, probably wait on River Drive till the last. That will affect, if we do put busing there, we're going to eliminate some of the parking.
Well, maybe, Larry, this would be a good time since we had a pretty good meeting the other day. And
Right.
Andy, you were there. Larry, you were there for part of it. Kevin Flanagan from Planning and Zoning, and then several people from the community. Let's just take a moment and go back to that. The original issue that I remember was we wanted to move the bus shelter on the corner of Market and Main behind River Hills, as Linnell mentioned. And there's been some discussion about whether we can do that, whether we can afford to do it, whether the feds would let us do it because it was built with some federal money. I think the consensus, and you two can correct me, but the consensus the other day was it should go back behind River Hills. That's the reason it was there, so it would be a transfer station. So patients coming in that ride the bus, it also is close to the train station and so forth. And it seemed like the plans that you showed were they were well thought through and good plans.
Yeah,
So-
and that's something if we could move that forward, then we could have a final determination because it'll completely change what Brad had. There was a lot of good ideas in that study, especially when we went to two-way traffic, eliminated a lot of the traffic signals. All that stuff is designed based on turning movements when you set up traffic signals at the time. I think that statement was correct on the volume of traffic once the bypass was done, and some other traffic patterns have changed over time. There's some good ones. There's some in there that I don't know if the committee would necessarily agree on, just more from truck drag as far as when you put turning movements on the intersection itself. Not always does it work as well as you might think. So there's some of the suggestions we could do relatively quick. Though the one with the alley that goes back to or is on the east side of the parking ramp, that is not an alley anymore. That was given to the property owner as a driveway. Doesn't really change anything. Some of the loading, unloading has changed over time. Some of them's been fire hydrants that's been removed over time or relocated. There's a lot of things that come into play that's not updated on an annual or sometimes in a 10-year process that could be done. I do want to add one thing on the parking. When they come to the bulk parking permits, that was established June 1st of 2008. All of those blue permits was parking in basically any of the public lots outside of the red permitted areas. The red permitted areas was under the old rate and was considered premium parking. All the other ones that was sold was for a parking permit anywhere in the white spaces. That's how that was designated. It is fairly clear from that presentation that it's not very clear to the general public and does need clarified. Along with some of the consistency, Holly and I have talked. There are easy ways, relatively inexpensive ways to put parking signs up and direct people to the lots and do some sort of uniformity. That's not a big task. And even the decorative type are not really a lot more expensive than your standard. So there are things that we could move toward that are relatively inexpensive.
Mr. Mayor, if I might just make one, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, Larry, do you think outside of the transfer station, River Drive, maybe, I know you were asking September, but I know if there's staff time available to do the striping, maybe if we could start discussing that in June to kind of get the ball rolling on one step. And then, or, go through the traffic safety and then maybe talk ordinances and signage by September. So if we're going to do an ordinance change, or we're going to make sure that we're tidied up on that before we make a sign for a parking lot that has a rule on it, we make sure that we've decided what that rule is going to be before we make the sign and
well,
kind of do those
absolutely.
second.
But we were talking more about the signs. I think you had some samples. I took some in Valley Junction that is, public parking and the arrows to get to the lot. Those were more directional to get you to the lot, and in the individual lot, depending on, ultimately what is it? Is it 3 hours? Is it 2 hours? And again, most of that stuff over time has changed based on input from the local businesses. River Hills was a perfect example. We did have a fairly big meeting with all the stakeholders. Hour and a half was determined to be kind of what we needed based on the average time spent at River Hills. And again, those aren't really chiseled in stone. They're not part of the 10 Commandments or anything. We can change that, and we have over time, and it really depends on the businesses that are there. Has their process changed? Has their needs changed? And I mean, really, that's what we need to do, is to serve the local businesses.
Okay, Andy.
Mr. Mayor, just one point, if I may go back to, I appreciate you mentioned this, and that's the discussion about River Hills and the relocation for the bus transfer station. And some of us that attended that meeting, one item I want to make sure and put in context, and Brett Douglas from Genesis was pretty clear on this one, is the money that's available is really going to be a function of some of the grant money that he would be able to secure and leverage in that, and the entire universe of that project. So I don't want to speak for money that he has. I just think, I just want to put that in context, but I think that's
a good point. And he said he would bring that back within a 2-week period of time to give us some more definitive information about what they earmarked for just moving that original transfer station, and we'll be able to reassess that. And that has enough, I think with you being there, Larry, and Kevin and Andy, it gives us good staff representation, so we'll make a good decision on that. But I think we need to keep moving on that, and certainly that would then lead to, and I think Holly's right, we've got to do some things in sequence, and maybe if we know we're going to move that, then we can start figuring out how to line up the buses, because 5 buses take a fairly long length to get on the side of the River Drive there, wherever you put them. So, Skip.
Okay, thanks, Larry, for explaining that. But I'll continue on here. I like the idea that the tickets be sold in one place. I think you can better track what's happening there. And Brad, you made one statement about UPS trucks might park there by the furniture store or TV store and walk down the street. That ain't going to happen. They're going to park right in the lane of traffic, run their package in and back out, which I really don't have a problem with. It doesn't take them that long. And I even see semis, delivery trucks parking in the center of Market Street and delivering into those businesses along there. Traffic can go on either side. I don't have a lot of problem with that. And maybe there is an issue there I'm not seeing. I will go along with, but I'm leery of the design on Market Street from 3rd up. I understand what you're saying, and my problem is, as I talked to you before the meeting, is turning off a 4th coming down the hill. But you seem to have a solution for that, so that'll probably work. The 100 block of Main, the parallel and the angle parking, I'm a little nervous about that. How would it be to poll those merchants in that block and see what they prefer? I do.
That's not my decision. That's G's.
Well, I'm just asking the question. You know, how about doing that? I think moving those stalls further away is not going to help those people in that block, I don't think. And
I would say that I had a follow-up to the River Hill or the River Drive. It's further along in the discussion of recommendations. One of my other ideas was, now that we put the quiet zone in, it's effectively made no sense to have River Drive between Market and Green be a two-way street, because you're not going from anywhere over here to get over here. What I would say is get rid of that bump or the quiet zone infrastructure on River Drive, move your turn lane or move your drive lane up basically where your your westbound lane is right now. Make that a one-way in, because you've got your one-way out on Commercial Street. And that way you've got your circulation around that parking lot. And what you can do is turn that other extra wide drive lane that you've got there into angle parking. And you solve the issue that Top Hat had of getting rid of parking out in front of her building. What you're doing is you're adding a big row that River Hills people or whomever else is going to park there all day or whatever. And you're adding 50 parking spots on in that parking lot by just getting rid of a useless drive lane.
Okay, it might be an issue to remove any part of that quiet zone structure because the railroad controls
If it's a one-way, there's no issue with it.
Okay. And I'll go back to something that the police chief is probably not going to agree with me, but I've watched this. I've been around here a long time. The only way, this is good, what you folks have done, and I appreciate it. The only way you're ever going to maintain it is with consistent enforcement.
Completely agree.
And it will not, it'll go along. We've got a gentleman, the chief's got a guy down there now that's doing a tremendous job. And he moves like a rabbit. I mean, he's after him. I still maintain we can hire a civilian. And I've got a copy of the parking lot permit fees. It was done since 212 clear through 218. Parking fines. There's probably enough money to cover that person. Well, I know you argue with me, but you're going to have to prove it to me.
That's pretty easy, Skip. Right now, that money is paying for the fees and the cost for people that are doing that enforcement now. So when you bring in somebody else, they're still being paid to do then something else. And then we've got to pay for
well, our idea was to keep more policemen on the street, which would.
But you can't guarantee you're going to double up on the enforcement fees and the fines. And the fines are only 18,000 last year. A couple years ago, it was 10,000. Last year, it was 12,795.
Why is that? Because it's not enforced.
I'm just saying you're not going to get consistent enforcement no matter what. And you won't be able to justify having a full-time person do that. It'll never cover their wages.
I still maintain it will. 20, 25 hours a week, staggered hours. people would soon get the drift and start doing what they're supposed to do.
Right. And then when that happens, what happens? There's no money there then. There's no revenue for it.
There's
So
what?
If people start doing what they're supposed to do, then that person is
fines
being
would go
paid
down.
with no offsetting revenue coming in.
Yeah. Hopefully the fines would
So,
go down
I mean,
then.
granted, that's ideally what we want.
Yes.
But then are you going to lay that guy off or that person off? Probably not. Because once they get on board, they're on board forever.
I'm telling you, I don't care what you say. It won't work unless you're consistent and enforce it.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say to Councilmember Stevens, he was talking about the parking out front, the angle versus parallel. The meeting we were at yesterday, they'll be sending out invites, I believe, to all the business owners to have a learning session about the project for Streetscape for them to provide or do Q&A. They're not out yet, but they'll be doing three special meetings so that they can learn about the project and give input, just so you know.
Thank you.
That's happening.
Thank you.
Good comment, Holly.
No, Mr. Mayor, if it'd be all right to ask Bob J. to come and speak again, I think it would be beneficial to Councilman Stevens' point, be beneficial to show where those dollars go to, that money that pays for the improvements at parking ramp, and then the fact that it does go into the general fund. But I just think it would be nice to have that placed in context anyway of how that money comes in. Apparently they're already strategizing. Anyway, when he becomes available, we'll ask him to speak to that because the parking ramp is of note.
Bob, I think, can you share your thoughts with the council in terms of Andy's comment?
And that's fine. And Bob, what I was going back to, thank you, Mayor. What I was going back to is identify, Bob, you and I talked about this a couple of times, but that the revenue that we gain from the parking fees and the parking fines and the rent, where does that go to?
Well, we have three sources of revenue. We have the revenue for the parking ramp, and then it has its own fund. That's what's paying for the improvements there now, because we've put that money in there, and out of that we pay for the ongoing maintenance for the parking ramp, the electrical and whatever else that runs through there. And then we had money build up so that we didn't have to bond for that. The parking lot permits and parking fines go into the general fund, and they're used to offset law enforcement costs.
All right. Sorry, Mayor, one other question. Bob, does any of that money, though, that money that comes in go to restorative work, repair, to the parking lots themselves?
No, it just goes in to cover the enforcement for the cost of the police department. I mean, that's one of those things when you have that department and those departments that are generating a lot of expenditures, you're dragging everything in that you can to offset it so that there's fewer, a smaller hit on the property taxes part of it. So
thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other council comments? Joni, anything you want to add as a reviewer, or ordinances that might have to be changed? How long does it take you? And do you have any thought about a timeline again? Just, with your workload, I'm not sure we can put more on you.
I think the more important issue on the ordinances, this is an extensive section of the code, and we'll have to coordinate that very carefully with police and with Public Works Engineering to make sure it all jives together. And so once we get that in place where transit's going to go, all of those issues, then we can sit down and clarify and correct the inconsistencies that are in that ordinance. Of course, it takes 3 readings unless 1 or 2 of the readings are waived. But and the other thing I was a little bit concerned about, and Larry didn't mention it, summer months is your busiest time. So trying to get your staff available to sit down and analyze this might be a little difficult at this time of the year. So that was one thing I was concerned about. Sure. So we may not be able to start the process of ordinance changes until later the fall or maybe early winter, so we can utilize engineering. And then the Public Safety Advisory Committee also has to weigh in on all of these changes as well. So it's going to be a process. I think if you're looking at September ordinances, I think that's wishful thinking. I think you're probably talking after the first of the year when we really have more staff available to do that.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I would just comment on that and agree. I'm glad that I appreciate City Attorney Keith pointing that out. You're right. It does sound like a long time, but the fall is probably a little bit more realistic. However, what a thought that comes to mind is myself, perhaps some other members of city staff then should meet with Mr. Reef and start identifying, as you termed, right, some of the low-lying fruit. I think we can get started on that. The physical improvements are certainly going to, there's a cost factor, but those are items we can start on relatively soon.
Okay, very
That's
good.
in June.
Okay, any other final comments from council on parking?
Nothing on the parking, Your Honor, but I just wanted to mention, we talked about a task force several times. I know it goes through a complicated process when you add a committee or a task force, but that's something we probably need to look at or discuss. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. It certainly would keep driving changes forward when there's somebody actively looking at it that could work with staff instead of, coming to, work sessions and having 4 or 5 things. I think that'd be a benefit in my opinion. I'm all for that. Having select business owners, select people from Main Street, possibly people that are downtown that know the downtown. I don't live down there. I certainly represent those folks, but I'd rather have direct input from people continually that see issues come about down there.
And you do have a Main Street Design Committee that
Right.
volunteers for free and does all this stuff on our free time that we could do for you. So it's not,
Well, and
it's not something that you need to dedicate staff time or worry about your budget for. We can come up
Certainly.
with the ideas for you, and then you can just say, we like it or we hate it for free.
I think we need something to keep these moving, just whatever it may be, whoever it may be, something to continually bring those to our attention, because we hear about parking every few years and it kind of builds and builds and builds and then it explodes. I'd rather have something that's proactive that keeps that conversation going. And it doesn't have to be an official. I guess it could be something like that would maybe meet with staff or whatever, but just keep that moving forward so we don't lose track of it.
We'll work with
Thank
you on
you.
that. I think
Thanks,
that's a
Brad.
good suggestion, Matt, because I know Amanda Valent, our previous city clerk, had a parking committee which was designated, and we never went any place with that. And I think we could pick up a few people off of that to couple with the regional planning office and our own staff, and it would be a good group. Okay. Public forum, is there anybody that wants to address an item not on the agenda? Okay. A couple of comments to the general public. I want to first of all, and I take credit to Matt and to Andy. We had some work done on the front of City Hall. Alicia Hauk and the Master Gardeners have reworked the front lawn, if you will, of the City Hall, and are putting in some wildflowers. And she told me the other day it may not look the greatest this summer because they're just getting started and rooted, but these are going to be annual flowers that will come up, and it will also help our Parks Department because they won't have to mow that area, which is a pain. So thanks to Alicia and to the Master Gardeners. I also want you to know some of the things that I do outside of office hours. Saturday, I was at the Wapello County Family Treatment celebration at Jimmy Jones Shelter. And yeah, I just want to make a comment. We're fortunate to have a family treatment program here in Wapello County. It was started by Judge Bill Owens. He started one in the juvenile court, and then Judge Kirk Daly does the adults. Our court was started without any state or federal money, and has now been recognized as one of the premier courts in the country, not just in the state. And this is National Drug Court Month, and when you see some of these people and talk to them, their lives have been totally changed, and we're just fortunate that they're getting the help and treatment that they need. It saves us, for every dollar we invest, it saves $27 of taxpayer money, and it keeps families together, and fewer kids go into foster care. So I think it's a very worthwhile effort. Tomorrow night, Andy Morris is going to represent the city at the Legion Field. A year ago, you as a council authorized us to help the Ottumwa school system with the lighting of Legion Field, and we were notified, Kim Hellige from the school system notified us that we did get a grant from the National Baseball League, and that is going to be in the neighborhood of $250,000 to redo some of the equipment at the Legion Field. So Andy will represent the city there. I also want to mention the June 2nd is the Major League Eating Contest at the Canteen, and they've asked for a proclamation. So if you're available, I think it's going to start at noontime. There'll be activity all day long, but the formal presentation will be at noontime. And I was told today that we have a number of outstanding candidates for the eating contest. I don't know how anybody can eat more than one, but anyway, that's beside the point. And lastly, when I was on vacation, I had the opportunity to visit another city council in Anchorage, Alaska. And I shared with Chris, our city clerk, that there is a section on the agenda that talks about mayor's reports or comments to the council. And I kind of had a chance to find out a little bit more about it. And I think it might be something we might want to look at adding to our own agenda, just so I can keep you aware of some of the things like the meeting that Andy and I and Larry talked about the other day with Streetscape. That's a very important activity, and we need to keep you fully aware of that. And sometimes we just don't have enough time to cover everything. So with that, I think unless the council members have something, is there anything else anybody wants to bring up? And then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Councilmember Berg?
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
7 p.m. Thank you all and good night.